the thing with climbing Gritstone is the ground is always close and the top's always close too, you know, but there's this really intense phase of climbing, or this you might be climbing for like a minute or like 2 minutes, where if you make a mistake, you're going to end up in hospital or worse, you know. And it's like it's such an intense experience, not only at the time of the climbing, but building up to it, because you know that you're going to go there and you're going to expose yourself to this situation, which, you know, are you ready for? And it's like, you don't know whether you're ready for it until you get there and you do it and you're exposed to that, oh, I wonder if this is going to be okay. So it's, it really plays on your mind, way before you do it, like maybe days, weeks beforehand. And sometimes you might be training or trying to get to a particular level so that you can consider exposing yourself to those few seconds or those moments. And anyway, I set off at this array, and Neil was belaying me, and he was standing on this boulder, and the idea was, you go up a little bit, they put a cam in, and then you climb above that, and you get to this point where if you were to fall off the last move, you're probably going to hit the ground. But if Neil, who was belaying, who's standing on this boulder, if he jumps off the boulder, then he'll be able to take enough rope in to kind of stop you hitting the floor. I remember getting up there and I was setting up to the last move, and I was like, oh no, I'm not going to do it. And then of course you're in no man's land, because you're in this situation where you might hit the ground if you fall off. And it's like, well, shall I go for it or shall I not? And at that time I was like, no, I'm not. It's just like, you know, I pressed the stop button for whatever reason. And then I went into like emergency mode, and I was like, okay, right, you've got to try and get down as far as possible so that you don't hit the ground when you fall off, because I knew I was going to fall off. So I managed to climb down like 2 or 3 moves, and then I obviously fell off, and he jumped off, and I missed the ground by a few, like 2 feet or something. And anyway, that was that. So like the Gritstone climbing scenes back then, I mean, the hardest route was probably Meshuggah or Parthian shot. They were both great in E9. To give viewers or listeners an idea of what that really means, because the British the grading system's a bit unique, is that so Parthian shot has got gear on it, so, and lots of people fell off it, and it's probably like 513C. So it's the 513C that you can fall off if you place the gear really, really carefully, although some people didn't know whether the gear was going to hold. And in fact, Will Stanhope took the fall and ripped the flake off and hit the deck and landed like 2 feet next to me from like 45 feet, you know. So it isn't a dead cert that the gear's always going to hold. But so like an E9, which is 513C, is going to have some gear, and there's a chance that if you fall off, you're going to be okay. Whereas Meshuggah doesn't have any gear at all, and it's probably 13A. So you're soloing 13A, and that equates to what an E9 is. So that the E9 is basically the how serious and how hard the route is in a hole, you know. So if it's 13A, then there's no gear. If it's 13B, there might be a little bit of gear. If it's 13C, there's probably some reasonable gear. And if it's 13D, then it's going to be really well protected. So you can pick and choose what kind of climbing you're going to do. And I distinctly remember when I was trying to do, when I set off to do Meshuggah, which was a total solo up until you get to the gear, and then after that it's really easy. It's like 5-10 top after that. My hardest grade I'd ever climbed was 13B.
Oof.
And you know, I was going to try and solo a 13A, so it was like right at my limit of climbing and psychological capacity, you know. I mean, it's like I was really going for it big time. And sometimes with the Gritstone routes, you kind of have to do that, you know, and that's what makes it so engaging and so exciting and so different to any other form of climbing that I've done, because it's really intense and it's potentially really dangerous. And the combination of those two things create an emotional experience which is unique and totally different to any other form of climbing that I've come across. We were in a phase of the climbing sort of era where bouldering mats did exist, but
they did
exist. Yeah, bouldering mats did exist. And when Neil went to climb Meshuggah, we had 3 bouldering mats with us in the vehicle. And I distinctly remember Neil looking at the climb and deciding to do it and looking at the bouldering mats. And then he was like, well, look, if you're climbing with a rope, you don't use bouldering mats. That's not cool. And he got up and up and up just before he gets the gear, and he fell off.
Oh my God.
And he came flying down. And I remember seeing him in the air thinking, oh my goodness, like I can't believe I've actually seen this. Neil flying through the air, he's got no gear, and they landed. This is like the landing that you never want to experience. But I remember that his 2 feet landed perfectly on this boulder that was slightly sloping, and he kind of then bounced off that and he went down the gully, and the rope did go tight where I was beeling onto, but he was upside down, and I don't think he was wearing a helmet. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly, but I'm not sure if he was. I don't think he was. And anyway, he had concussion, and he was okay. He was coherent. He could talk, but he was definitely a bit banged up. And he had this like red Alfa Romeo at the time that he was working for DMM, and it was really fast. And I immediately saw the opportunity to take advantage of being able to drive it and get into hospital as fast as possible, which obviously I had a really good excuse for, which was like, oh great, right, let's go to hospital. And then just like ragging it through the Peak District on these really windy roads, having the best excuse to get there as quickly as possible and drive really fast. So anyway, yeah, and but one of the things about that is that I went to do the route which is at the beginning of Hard Grit called Gaia, but I wanted to do that, and Neil was belaying me. What happened was I was getting up near the end to the point where if you fall off, you're going to hit the ground. And Neil was looking up at me, and then he was looking down, because if you run and pull the rope in, then it can stop. You can stop the person you're belaying hit the ground. And Neil was looking up and looking down and looking up and looking down, and then he started getting really dizzy. And what happened was he couldn't see, and he didn't know whether I was falling off or not, which meant that he couldn't decide whether to run or not, because he couldn't see properly because he was totally spinning out to hit his head from Meshuggah. And that meant that I mean, fortunately, I didn't fall off. I got to the top, and I was like, yeah. And like Neil was just like had his head in his hands, like sort of sitting on the ground, staunch on the ground. And I came down, I was like, hey, you okay? You okay? And then he was just emotionally wrecked because he didn't want to pull me off if I hadn't fallen off. But then if I had fallen off, he wanted to make sure that he could run and pull the rope in so I didn't hit the ground. And he was just completely unable to do any of those things because he couldn't see properly. And just to finish this story off, I then ended up belaying my friend Charlie Woodburn on a direct finish called Harder Faster, which is it's E9, whereas Gaia's E8. And Charlie did the first ascent of that, and it's super gnarly actually. Like if you fall off the last move, you're definitely going to hit the ground from like 50 feet, and it's really, really easy to fall off because the top of it is so poor that I've hung it with 2 hands and slipped off just hanging it with 2 hands, you know. And then I ended up belaying my friend Mike Weeks trying to do the second ascent of that route, and he went up and he was just about to do the last move and he got the sequence wrong.
Oh man.
And I was like, oh no, that's not good, because he hadn't got his hand up high enough and he was going to reach up and get the top, and he started reversing. But the problem is there aren't any footholds on this section of the route. It's all cycles with your feet smearing beyond friction. And I was really sure that you couldn't downclimb that. It's too difficult and too precarious. And as he was trying to reverse it, I was ready to like leg it. And what I'd done is I'd actually put a cam in the ground at the bottom of the route. So the rope went down from him. Instead of coming to my B-lane device, it went to a cam that was literally in the ground in between these two boulders. And then the rope was just sitting on the ground coming over to me. And what happened was when he fell off, I ran down this slope. And because the rope was going in through a 90 degree, I was able to take in way more rope than if it had gone straight up to him. And he had two pieces of gear. One of them came out and the second one held, but the carabiner was loaded so much that the gate popped open and the rope was just sitting in the groove of the carabiner. And that was the only bit of gear. And when Mike had his legs bent like this, and he was just above the ground, and he literally straightened his legs and stood up. It was that close. It was so close. And poor Bean, Mike's girlfriend, sitting there watching her walk. She was just like, in tears. And Mike came over to me and just gave me a big kiss and a hug. And like, thank you so much.
Oh my God.
I definitely saved his bacon there. But so I think that the whole point of these stories is that the Gritstone climbing scene then and now is incredibly intense, and it's intense from a climbing perspective, but particularly emotionally, because the consequence of making a mistake can be really severe.